Heather Conway, we had a good discussion last year, and I thank you for coming back.
So the number of women in the boardrooms has been a hot topic in the recent years. For example, the Ontario Securities Commission is considering whether to mandate targets for the number of women in director and executive roles for public companies. As you have been a member on several boards, have you ever felt overpowered by the men on the boards, and do you think that this is an adequate solution for the issue?
I have been on a few boards. I mean, I've been on a number of volunteer boards, and I've also been on a couple of paid boards. I continue to be on the Amex Bank Board of Canada. It's a non-publicly traded board in Canada, but because it's a bank, you have to have a board. And I was on the Investors Group Mackenzie board, which is one of the power company boards. And I had to leave that board when I went to the CBC because Power Corp owns La Presse, and I felt it was a possible perceived conflict of interest, so I left. I would say not overwhelmed so much as outnumbered. I mean, certainly the boards are male-dominated. I do think that there have been multiple studies, there have been multiple commissions, there have been multiple efforts by Catalyst, by others, to try and increase the number of women on boards, and it hasn't really happened. So I think if you give everybody every opportunity to make a change and the change doesn't occur that you want to see, then you have to move to a more structural solution. So I do support the idea of mandating that you get more women on boards. It's also been shown that when you have more women on boards, those companies outperform on the stock market. So there is a link. You know, there's lots of companies that have put one woman on the board, lots and lots, and then they've replaced 3 men with another 3 men. So it's just not happening at the pace that you want to see.
Have you personally felt any systemic barriers in the workplaces you have been employed at? And do you have any advice for the women in the room who aspire to become senior managers in the future?
I think, you know, the systemic issues are ones that exist whether they're in the workplace or whether they're in society. I think often women's voices are not taken as seriously. I think often I've had the experience many times, and I'm sure your other female guests, Ralph, would have had this as well, where you're in a meeting, you say something, 3 minutes later, some guy repeats what you said, and they go, and everyone goes, well, what Jack said is a great idea.
Brilliant.
And you go, I fucking said that. That's not Jack. That experience happens over and over again, and I'm not sure it's any kind of malicious intent on the part of men to say, if you said to them, buddy, that wasn't Jack's idea, they genuinely go, oh, it's not a thing that people set out to do. It is a reflection, I think, of a broader societal issue where positions of authority and credibility are traditionally held by certain groups, and so our expectation is that leadership and authority and ideas that come from that group that we see constantly portrayed in those roles is real, and it's how unconscious bias happens. It's how we start to believe certain things that simply aren't true. So, you know, have I been the victim of that? For sure. What advice would I give you? Call it out. Call it out whether you're a guy or a woman. You know, if you see it, or you see it, it often happens with people of color as well as women, or people with disabilities. It happens with anyone who's traditionally underrepresented in leadership roles. And I think if everybody starts to just call it, and you can do it in a really professional manner and just say, I just want to check ourselves here. I'm pretty sure that was actually so-and-so's idea, or I haven't heard so-and-so speak. Often there are people in the room who take up all the air, and if you're not actually noticing and being vigilant about it, you'll never hear from certain people. And so it's a huge opportunity to get more ideas, more intelligence into any conversation if you're very conscious about what you're doing about that kind of stuff.
So a study done by the International Women's Media Foundation illustrated that close to 2 out of 3 female journalists have been sexually harassed or face abuse during the course of their employment. Harassment included verbal abuse and physical violence in addition to intimidation. Other problems women face in the industry include achievements becoming secondary to their successes and speaking out about sexist or illegal behavior to be what is known as career suicide. What has CBC News done differently internally within the organization since the Jian Ghomeshi incident to prevent these things from happening to women and assist in promoting the long overdue discussion about consent, harassment, and sexism that is very much present in the media industry?
So the first one is around female journalists and how do we support them as they go out and do their work and are confronted by sometimes, that terrible sort of thing that started happening to a lot of women journalists was the grabber thing. We have offered to all of our female journalists that if they're going to cover something where they feel that their safety or their security is at risk, that they have the right to have security with them, and we will provide that. And we do. And some do ask for it, and lots don't, but it's available to them if they want it. In the post-Ghomeshi environment at CBC, as most of you know, I think we had an independent investigator who came in called Janice Rubin. She did a whole bunch of conversations with people from CBC. She made a whole series of recommendations around how we could improve our approach to these kinds of issues. And we've taken those on board. We've, I think, implemented all of them at this point. So there's a number of different things that are available to people. We gave retraining to all our managers and our HR people. Every CBC employee has to complete mandatory code of conduct training. We created a values and ethics commissioner and a hotline so people could call anonymously if they didn't feel comfortable going to their manager or HR. We've done all of the things that I think anyone would do when confronted with that. The challenge that you have as a large organization of 8,000 odd people is you can put all the policies in place that you want. If you don't shift your culture, if people don't internalize the values that you want to have in your workplace, if people continue to behave badly, it's not the policies that stop people. The policies are what you can use ultimately to say, well, you didn't live up to this policy and therefore we're going to terminate you or we're going to discipline you in some manner. Or, they're pieces of paper that say these are our standards. This is what we want to create a safe workplace for people, and these are the tools that you have as somebody who might be confronted with bad behavior to use to say, well, this happened and it violates the policy, so I'm going to bring that forward. So they're useful in that sense. I think what you really have to do is create a place where people can look each other in the eye and know that if they raise their hand, they'll have support for pointing out something that's wrong behavior. It doesn't eliminate it. I have no doubt that there's someone behaving badly somewhere on any given day because human beings are messy. And, in real life, real people are working very hard to make things better, and other real people with problems are working very hard to not do that. And so you're constantly trying to be vigilant, you're constantly trying to shift the culture, you're constantly trying to make the conversation one that, for me, has to become normalized. We have to normalize, bad shit happened over here, I want to point it out and talk about it, and let's deal with it. and not let things fester or build up or become secrets or anything else. And in that sense, it's like any social group, be it a family or a group of friends or any other place. Your workplace is a place where you need to feel safe, you need to feel like you can surface stuff, and that it's a normal thing to raise a problem and get it dealt with. And that's what we try and do.
In your interview with Peter Mansbridge regarding Jian Ghomeshi, you denied that there were any problematic behaviors in the workplace. However, soon after you changed your view on the problem and decided to investigate, you concluded that there was indeed inappropriate behavior by Ghomeshi, and congratulations on taking action and firing him. What made you want to look deeper into the case and take action? Furthermore, apart from firing him, what was the biggest challenge faced by you in the Ghomeshi case?
We had actually announced the Rubin investigation before I did Peter Mansbridge, so we had surfaced that there were things that we had not captured in our, what turned out to be a not thorough enough HR investigation. So as people may recall, the Ghomeshi thing started with Ghomeshi himself coming to CBC and saying the Toronto Star is trying to do a story about me, it's my ex-girlfriend, you know, it's not true, blah, blah, blah. And we, when we looked at his file and stuff, we didn't have anything. And then somebody sent us an email to an employee in his area that said, you know, I have reason to believe some of this behavior that he's being accused of outside of the CBC may have crossed over into the workplace, and that was what triggered me to say, do an investigation. That happened to a lesser degree than we would have liked, which I think the Fifth Estate surfaced. But at the time that I fired him for behavior that was evidence to us from outside the CBC and with women who he saw outside of the CBC. His behavior inside the CBC was not any of the stuff for which he was put on trial. And so the reference to the relationship stuff, was not people inside the CBC. There was a complaint apparently in 2010 of a woman who gave her complaint to a union steward, and it never got carried forward. That was around behavior, not that behavior, but inappropriate behavior. But most of the behavior inside the CBC was in the vein of either bullying or creating a climate of intimidation. So it wasn't the stuff that came out from the Toronto Star, the 9 women who came forward in the Star. It was that stuff was all women from outside, and so that's what I was referring to in the interview.
Okay.
What was the toughest part of it for me? I mean, those of you who remember it at that time, it was a staggering amount of media attention. He was a very, very big star. I think what was hard for me was that the whole of the CBC was deeply upset and embarrassed about it, and so many people at the CBC had nothing to do with it, right? They never worked with him, never saw him. You know, we're delivering, you know, news in Inuktitut 70% of the day in the north. Those people had nothing to do with Jian Ghomeshi, but everybody got brushed with it, and everybody got felt deeply, deeply ashamed and embarrassed about it. And the morale, the impact on morale, the impact on people who were truly mission-driven public broadcasters trying to do a great job every day. I think that was one of the hardest things, was to see how badly they felt about their institution that they've been so proud to be associated with. So it was that that sweeping brush that tainted everybody, that was really hard to see and hard to keep people motivated and bring their pride back.
An article on the CBC website titled "The CBC Right to Ask for $400 million in Additional Funding," Executive Heather Conway says on Metro Morning, was stating that CBC was asking for an additional $400 million for the purpose of making CBC an advertisement-free network, and you were supportive of this proposal. Why do you believe that the CBC deserves the $400 million for this campaign, and what will be the benefits?
The $400 million ask came about as a result of the Minister of Heritage putting out a request for people to offer their thoughts about the future of Canadian media in a digital world. And she said everything's on the table. And so we said, you know what, we're the third worst funded public broadcaster in the world. We are constantly torn because we have to sell advertising, and so we have to have commercial kind of content that prevents us from focusing solely on our public service mandate. And the breakdown of the $400 million is as follows. $300 million of it, roughly, is to replace, first of all, the $253 million we currently earn in advertising. So it's just replacement. The next chunk is you can't go to a producer who's made a comedy for you that's a 22-minute show to fit ads in and say, make me a 30-minute show, but I'm not going to pay you for the other 8 minutes. So you got to pay people for those extra 8 minutes that are no longer advertising. And the final chunk of it was to help us transition to a digital future by being able to invest in our OTT platform, our digital distribution, digital content, and all of that. It amounts to $1 a month for Canadians, so it's $12 a year when you break it down, and it would move us from being the world's third worst funded public broadcaster to the fourth worst. So it's not like it would be a crazy revolution. It would just allow us to continue to offer, I think, a unique product for Canadians and one that we need.
As the former Chief Business Officer for the Art Gallery of Ontario, you must have a strong appreciation for the arts. Do you think that the 0.02% of Toronto's 2018 operating budget being used to fund the arts is justified? What can the City of Toronto do to promote the arts and create a unique culture for the city?
I think the arts are deeply important because I don't think anybody's going to remember whether we had a condo on this or that corner 100 years from now is not going to define who we are as a city. Did we create a place where people felt they could come together and make beauty and make art and make things that move us and make music and celebrate what we care about? So I don't think it's enough. And I actually think finding creative ways to allow artists to stay in cities is part of what makes a healthy city. I know a lot of artists are moving to Hamilton right now. Hamilton's going to benefit from all those artists moving there. Hamilton is going to become a hotbed of cultural activity and creators and people who want to make music and want to, young creative people are going to go where they can afford to live and collaborate together. And that's a great loss for a city. And so I do think it's important for Toronto to figure out ways to, find pockets where we can support artists and creators to be and live.
With the growth of social media, news outlets, and the internet as a whole, the subsequent reduced television and radio consumption, how is CBC adapting to the changing environment of broadcasting?
Okay, so the very first thing I want to tell all of you is that if all you have is an internet connection, you can all sign up for CBC TV app, and you can watch Kim's Convenience, and you can watch CBC News. You do it all for free, and if you want to watch it without ads, you can do it for $4.99. So any show all kinds of stuff that you want from the CBC, tons of comedy, tons of wonderful stuff. You can get an OTT service delivered via all these Apple computers that I see here. So that's one of the ways we're dealing with it. We certainly know that that people are shifting away from cable, and it's expensive. And when I look at the landscape and think about what is our strategy for migrating the CBC to the digital CBC that will ultimately replace the linear CBC, I think people are going to privilege their internet service, right? That's going to be their big spend over their cable service. And in that internet service, they're going to have probably Netflix for $9 or $10 a month. And then they're going to have a few more OTT services. And so my goal is to make sure the CBC is one of those services that they pick and say, well, you know, I do want a Canadian service. And then I think people are going to go, maybe I want Amazon Prime, maybe not. Maybe I want a sports OTT or a food one if that's my thing. And they'll build a little bundle of OTT services that will meet all their needs. You know, they still won't get to $50 by the time you do that. I pay a cable bill right now that would choke a horse. My cable bill is like $400 a month.
So is mine.
And it's ridiculous. And, you know, I have a bunch of channels, but I don't have, like, I'm not buying the Sunday ticket, much as I'd like to, because I'm a football fan, but I don't, like, I'm saying I don't have the big buffet. So you can watch it on your phone, you can watch it, you know. So basically what we're doing is making all of our content available everywhere, however people want it. We've just launched internally the CBC Listen app, which is going to be 40 streaming, you can get CBC Music right now, 40 streaming services for free. You can get CBC Radio on your phone as well. But we're going to merge them into one because our podcast business has turned into 300 million downloads in the past year. We're the #1 podcaster in the country. We're in fact the #1 Canadian digital media company in the country. So our reach at our digital reach at CBC is about 18 million uniques a month. There are very few companies that even come close to CBC in terms of our digital reach. The ones that do are Facebook, Amazon. It's the who's who of giant technology companies. The ones that have time spent are companies like Netflix that have long-form content that people obviously engage with for hours at a time. So our goal, because we have pretty ubiquitous reach, is to start increasing our time spent with people. But, you know, we touch 60% of millennials in this country every month. So, and largely through news. People consume the CBC News app quite a bit. So, you know, I think we have the strategies. Our challenge is money. It costs a fortune to maintain both. So we have to maintain this linear system and all these TV stations and radio stations and transmitters across the country and create digital platforms.
Thank you for coming in, Ms. Conway.
Yep.
So Netflix's Stranger Things and HBO's Game of Thrones, arguably the biggest recent successes in terms of serialized content, were initially turned down by many network executives due to their unorthodox plots, premises, characters, and settings. However, this seems to be the very thing that audiences have responded positively to. Funding criteria for Canadian content has been criticized, much like those network executives, for favoring safe, formulaic, but ultimately forgettable content. Ms. Conway, do you see the CBC having a role in revising these funding criteria or finding alternative ways to nurture greater creativity and cultural value? If so, how do you envision this happening?
Yes, of course I do. I mean, I think it's very difficult to make a kind of a blanket statement about content. There are different kinds of content for different channels, first of all. So, you know, a Game of Thrones is an HBO channel, so from the get-go, no commercial breaks. It's a paid service, and so people are paying a premium for that, and they want a premium kind of content for that. Ours is free, as you know, and so the expectation of that level of content. I mean, I'll tell you guys something interesting. Has anybody watched The Crown? It's a Netflix series about
I watched it.
the Queen and whatnot. A wonderful series, 10 episodes, 130 million US for 10 episodes. That is about the same as the budget for the entire CBC non-news programming for 1 year. Okay, one series on Netflix, daytime, primetime, nighttime, entire year. That is the budget for the CBC. So again, what we do is make miracles. Kim's Convenience is a very, very high quality show, very funny. Schitt's Creek.
Which one? What's the first one?
Kim's.
Oh, yeah.
The one you watched. Schitt's Creek, Baroness von Sketch. Has anybody watched Baroness? So Baroness was just picked up. It's a 4-women comedy sketch show. It was just picked up by IFC in the US to replace Portlandia because they thought this is similar kind of humor. And, you know, the Baronesses are all over Facebook. They're all over social media because it's sketch and it's... So we kind of play, I think, with lots of high-risk comedy. Crawford is something we just launched on our OTT service first before we launched it on linear. And it's about a guy who's a raccoon whisperer. And when
Sorry,
I saw
missed it here.
you can catch it on OTT. When I saw it, I thought, I'm not sure I get this show. And somebody said to me, it's not for you. It's not, you're not the audience. It's for young people. They will get the show. And I said, okay, fine. And you know, it's connecting with people, but it's not because a network executive said, I don't think a raccoon whisperer belongs on the CBC. We're open to whatever. We're open to good. What we have had to do is find ways to leverage those limited dollars we have to get high quality content. Now, I don't know how many of you watch Anne, which is the new Anne of Green Gables that we did with Netflix. It is the #4 most binge show for Netflix in the world. In the world. So don't tell me I make shit content. That is a great piece of content that Netflix didn't have that much to do with creatively, right? But they did provide a huge amount of the funding, and in exchange for that funding, they got worldwide rights. And what I got was Canadian rights. And that's okay, because that's all I need. I'm the public broadcaster. I don't have an international channel. I'm not paid by the Swiss. All I need to do is give Canadians great content. And so if I want to attract great Canadian creators, and Anne was made by a woman who's a Canadian who worked on Breaking Bad for 8 seasons. So she wanted to make something that was a more challenging, more dramatic, deeper, more complex, darker version of a book that had touched her as a child, and she created something really beautiful. If you haven't watched it, don't think it's your mother's Green Gables. It's not. It's a really powerful show. You know, you can find ways to make great stuff if you can find the money. Money matters. So again, the fact that we're doing with 130 million US what somebody else is doing for one show and going, aren't we great? I'd say, yeah, you're great. Want to program an entire network for an entire year with that? We'll see how great you are.
Ms. Conway, in recent years, we have seen the online streaming of television programs grow astronomically. Companies such as Netflix have gone from small startups to major players in the television industry. In response to this, CBC TV started streaming its 14 regular linear television channels for free and launched a paid over-the-top TV subscription service for $4.99 per month, which included a premium service that bundled on-demand episodes without advertisements and CBC News Network in 2017. Is there a panic within the cable TV industry to get on this new wave before it's too late? And is there a feeling amongst industry professionals that streaming will lead to the end of the cable TV industry?
I don't know if there's a panic. I mean, this is a little bit of a follow-on to a question one of your colleagues asked that was really about, you know, how are we adapting to the digital age? I think, Ashley, it was your question. I think what you're seeing is a decline, steady, not dramatic decline in people having cable subscriptions. So it's probably gone down about 15% in the last 10 years. So now I think it's around 73% of Canadian households have, say, a multi-channel service, cable-type service, that they pay a cable or a fibe type of service for. 10% of that decline's happened in the last 4 years. So the pace is accelerating. My guess is that a lot of you who have gone through either using your parents' service, maybe your parents' Netflix subscription, your tolerance for paying a huge amount of money for your content is fairly low. The idea that you're not watching television content is false, because a lot of what you consume is television, whether it's you watch it on your laptop or your phone, but it's content generally that was produced for television. If it's short form, YouTube content, that's a different beast, but a lot of long form was originally produced for television in some form or another. And I think what's going to happen is erosion, 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 cliff. And so the cable industry will start to make most of its money from its broadband services that it currently delivers those cable services over, and they're just going to start upping your data charges. So it's kind of a heads we win, tails you lose situation, because ultimately, how are you going to get your content? It's got to come over either a wireless or a data. It's an ISP. That's how you're going to get it. So they're going to get you one way or another.
Prior to joining CBC, you were the Chief Business Officer at the Art Gallery of Ontario, which under your tenure, the gallery saw its attendance increase by 20% and achieved its highest membership levels. Considering it is quite evident that you have contributed to the Art Gallery of Ontario's success, what actions and/or revisions do you believe CBC must take in order to improve its business model to survive and possibly thrive?
Well, I think a lot of the things that we did at the gallery were about segmenting the audience and figuring out how to invite people who had never been to the gallery into the gallery before. One of the first items being the neighborhood that the gallery sits in Toronto. The gallery had been advertising in things like the New Yorker. I don't think anyone in New York needs to worry about whether they got a gallery to go to in Toronto. And they were spending a lot of money on that kind of thing. And so just focusing our efforts on our local audience and figuring out the right invitation was a big part of generating interest and engagement, making it less intimidating, finding ways to talk to people about art that was fresh and new, I think was part of that. When I look at the CBC, it's through, I look at every decision I make today at the CBC and say, is this advancing the digital CBC that will replace the linear CBC? Because if I don't make the CBC into a digital media company, I will not be relevant. If I don't have the CBC reflect and represent what Canada is today, we will not have a relevant CBC. It's about audience, making it audience-driven. It's about making it digital. It's about the fight for content. And it's really a fight for relevance. If Canadians don't feel they need it, they won't support paying for it. So it's all of those things. And I think we've made incredible progress in the last 4 years since I've been there really transforming it into a very digital organization, but we have lots more to do.
How did you develop a multitude of skills, and what is your advice to graduating students who are struggling to find a decent job?
You know, when I studied economics as my undergraduate degree, and then I did a parliamentary internship, and then I did a master's degree in industrial relations in the UK at a Marxist school, because I wanted to study Marxist economics, and there weren't many places in Canada where you could do that. And when I came back, really my only career strategy was to recognize that I was at the bottom of the biggest cohort in history called the baby boom. And they were all here, and I was about sort of 7 to 10 years behind them. That's not enough space to know that they're going to die or retire. And so I
And
thought,
she looks at me. I'm hanging in here.
so I knew if I went into any large institution, I would have to fight my way through the biggest cohort in history. And I thought, well, that's not a good plan, because how are you going to distinguish yourself when you're always going to have that sort of 7 years less experience? And so I didn't even apply to any organization that had more than 100 employees. I just eliminated that from my job search. And I graduated into a recession, so you know, I wasn't employed right away. I took contract work. I ran around and asked different people for bits and bobs here and there, and I kind of cobbled together a bunch of side gigs, as people do. And so it wasn't that different. What I was willing to do, and what you find in small organizations, is you become a jack of all trades. You have to do everything, because there aren't enough people to do, we're the HR department, we're the this department, we're the that department. Everybody's everything. So if you want to gain a lot of skills fairly early, I think going to small businesses, you get much more stuff to do at an earlier age. And then once you've amassed a certain amount of that, you can go into a large organization at a higher level. And that's what I did. I went into TD Bank when I was in my late 20s, and I was hired as an AVP. And I think if I'd started at TD Bank as a teller or a junior management trainee of some kind, I don't think I'd have risen to that position for years. But because I came from the outside and had a skill set already from working in small businesses, I think I was able to do that. So it was a good strategy for me to get a lot of different experiences and then leverage that when I wanted to. The other place that people don't think about, that are all looking for young, smart people, and where you can actually get a lot of good experience, is government. There are really interesting challenges and jobs in government. Governments are trying to solve the hardest problems facing society today. They're trying to solve poverty, they're trying to solve medical care, they're trying to solve all these different things, and they cannot recruit young people. So you can actually get to work on really interesting stuff. You probably don't want to stay there your whole life, but you actually can get really good experience, good references. You'll meet people who have networks, you know, and sometimes the work is really interesting. And in politics as well. If you're interested in making change and you want to work in politics, you get to see things from way up here. I was one of the people who helped create the GST. That happens once in 100 years, that you reform the tax system at that dramatic a level. And it was really, really interesting.
A few weeks ago, I was watching David Letterman's new show, My Next Guest Needs No Introduction, and he had President Obama on for the first one. And they were talking about the 2016 election, and I don't remember what Obama said specifically, but to paraphrase, he said something along the lines of, you know, if you get your information from Fox News, you are living on a different planet. And I think what we saw in 2016 in the US was that all these news channels were sort of supporting their own partisan opinions, and depending on which channel you tune into at night, your opinions on American politics were incredibly different. And we're at a stage now where, you know, the political divide between the Democrats and the Republicans has never been further apart. So, as the head of the CBC's news and the other aspects of the broadcast committee, but how do you make sure that the news that you guys are delivering isn't partisan to any specific party here in Canada?
I am so glad you asked
That's a good
this
question. I'm glad you asked.
I actually have two answers for you. One is around what is our current approach to ensuring that we have balanced coverage and non-biased coverage. We actually have things like our election coverage is audited independently to show whether we privileged one group over another and all of that. So we have multiple studies that show, despite everybody claiming, no, you're biased towards them, no, you're biased towards them, we're not biased. And it's an independent firm that does it, it's not us. They look at every piece of content that we do and they come to a conclusion about whether we were leaning or biased in any way. The secondary piece of your question is really about algorithms. And all of you are subject to this. As you look at your feeds all day long, you are feeding an algorithm. And the algorithm is designed to sell advertising and to keep you coming back, because your time spent is what is sellable. So Facebook wants you to keep coming back and spending time on Facebook, because Facebook is not a media company, it's an advertising company. And all they really want is you and an advertiser put together in a space where they know you're going to show up regularly. The problem that creates is the one you identified. You end up in an echo chamber because everything you click on, they give you more of. Right? So every time you click on a right-wing article, you send a message to Facebook that says, I like right-wing articles, and you get more of them in your feed. That's how it works. If you only like this type of thing and I like left-wing articles, you get more of those. What we are going to do as the public broadcaster, and we've made this decision, is to run our OTT data management platform to say, we will not do that. And we're going to be transparent with Canadians about it and say, if you think you can come to CBC and only click on these kind of news stories because these are the kind you like, we're going to constantly be reminding you there's another side to this story. And we're going to feed you that, whether you want it or not. And we're going to tell you the reason we're doing that is because we believe that people should hear both sides of things. So as a public broadcaster, we can take that stance and say, I'm not here to sell advertising of your time and what I'm here for is to meet my mandate, which is to inform, enlighten, and entertain. So it is a huge public service that we're probably not going to get credit for, but it's a really, really, really important thing. And it's really important for all of you to go and find things from the other point of view so that your feeds don't simply become biased echo chambers where you only hear what you want to hear. You've got to have a questioning mind, an open mind, a critical mind to be an engaged citizen.
Okay, on behalf of Ryerson, I want to thank you, Heather. It's been spectacular. Thank you.